Now let's get some in-depth analysis on the summit that took place in Singapore between the leaders of North Korea and the U.S. With me in studio for the analysis is Dr. Kim Chang-su from Korea Institute for Defense Analyses for his take on what we saw together in studio. Thank you for joining us again.
Thank you for having me again. Thank you.
Now let's just dive right in. An unusual summit that we watched together here in studio yesterday, given that the two leaders and the two countries are still technically in a state of war. What's your overall takeaway from yesterday's summit?
You know, putting an end to the long-held, decades-long, the war is very difficult. You can make a declaration, very political declaration once and for all. But when it comes to the reality, it would take very many parties, for example, like China and many other countries as well, the United Nations, like 16 countries and 22 countries as well. So it is a very complicated process. It'll take a long time. But as a first kind of step, talking about the new relation between the two countries, the United States and North Korea, and their also kind of their way to denuclearize the North Koreans. I think this is a very, if we can take a very reasonable standard, because we are expecting pretty much, because it's not our fault, because Mr. Trump made all kind of good things, because this is going to be one package deal, one grand deal. So the expectations are running very high. Until just one day ago, because Mr. Pompeos said that there will be a V. The letter V is very important.
Right.
But what we are pretty much disappointed, because looking at the joint statement rather, is there was no letter like a CVIG, CVID of course. So I think that is the first inaction by many South Koreans and also in Japan as well, because they were really a little disappointed because the letter we are looking for was actually absent in the documents. But when you listen to the press conference by President Trump later on, actually, I thought it was complimentary what he said, because one-page document cannot say everything, because that's why he said it's a very comprehensive document. So I thought, even though some critics in South Korea was disappointed and criticized because the terminology, CVID, was missing in the document. But when you listen to his, him in the press conference later on, I got the idea, what he was trying to say to the North Korean leader Kim Jong-un and what is missing in the document. So this is, if you lower the expectation, this is a typical document after several months, one-page document, I think that's good enough. But if you cannot lower that kind of expectation, if you still have a very normal, standard and expectations, just like any other documents. So that's why we are many people were disappointed. But the problem is not actually the joint statement or joint document, because we can understand this is a very comprehensive document.
Right.
And many things will be hammered out later on at the following meetings. But what really concerned us, including myself, particularly the Korean Minister of National Defense, was he's talking the phraseology of the provocative war games. I think this is just a reaction, because I was told that Mr. Kim Jong-un at the one-to-one meeting, or maybe extensive meeting, they talk about, we have been pretty much under duress by your very provocative war games. So this is a phraseology that he had in his brain. So I think that he just repeated what he heard from Kim Jong several hours ago. So that's why he repeated that particular phrase of provocative, expensive military drills. So because he said, I don't want to spend too much time on military exercises, and I want to spend too many soldiers out there. So I want to withdraw them back. So this is something that he has continued to say, repeated over and over again during his political campaign in 1960. So, but I really concerned because the terminology he used, military war games or provocative, I think this is exactly what North Korea and China have been talking about. This is very provocative. So why our position is this is purely defensive in nature, and we have nothing to hide, because this is a democratic country, the United States and South Korea. We are ready. We should be ready for any kind of contingency on the Korean Peninsula. So that's why we have been working on these issues, and we have been pretty much eager to continue this military exercise and training many years to come, as long as North Korean threats persist. But this is really quite shocked many South Korean security analysts, because not only Mr. Mr. Trump is misleading by saying like provocative and expensive. Expensive is something that we can understand, but war games is very misleading because this is a combined military exercise, military training. So I really don't understand. And one thing I really like to indicate to you is he was already talking about 32,000 U.S. soldiers.
Which was, in fact, 28,000.
Exactly. The end strength is 28,500. This has been here for about almost 10 years now. So all the numbers he had is something from a very olden days. So I was really shocked why he's making that kind of figures again and again. So we got to a very, rationale. We have to point out that this is not the end strength you have stationed here in the Korean Peninsula. It's 28,500, but actually some of them are just rotating for some other missions outside. So actually the actual number of these soldiers stationed on the peninsula, we don't know. But actually 32,000 is too much. So this is something that I really point out as a military analyst, because otherwise people just don't say, oh, he must be right. And this might give a wrong impression to the South Korean audience, but also the North Korean leaders. So we got to be very clear about the numbers and the costs, and we're going to have another discussion about the burden sharing issue this year again.
Full-on review by Dr. Kim about the military side, but looking back at the summit itself and the joint agreement that we've extensively covered just now, is there a win for both sides?
Yes, win both sides because they agreed and because they made all kind of diplomatic efforts and gestures to make this a possibility. So they finally made it.
Symbolically speaking too, yes.
Both countries, North Korea and the United States. So in this sense, this is a very great important win for both countries. But also they said, oh, we are going to guarantee your regime, and also we are going to work toward a complete denuclearization. Even though it's not set clear, intentionally, I think, ambiguous because it was very difficult. They don't have time to define exactly terms in the documents. But I think if you have a very kind of lower your expectations, then this is something we can expect. We can give a good point. So this is why we have a totally opposite opinions coming from in Korean South.
Variety of angles, right?
Yes, like some people just conservative for the political party affiliation, they give 10 points out of 10, as opposed to some other people who gives 3 points. So this is a very difficult questions, and depending on how you're going to read these into. So this is a very complex issues, and I think really expecting the debriefing by Mr. Pompeo when he comes to Korea already, and he's going to talk at this issue very intensively with the government officials here in Korea.
Now, you've just briefly mentioned one of my points that I was going to bring up later on. As you said, Secretary of State Mike Pompeo is heading to South Korea as we speak momentarily, and he will be addressing some of the regional allies. Is that considered a follow-up, a post-summit talks with the allies, or should we see that as Pompeo coming over to the regional allies to brief them of what happened between the two leaders in Singapore?
Well, I think it's both. It's definitely he has to brief the Korean government and the Japanese government because some of the issues they talked about, and Mr. Trump talked about in Singapore, has tremendous implications not only South Korea but also Japan as well. So that's why Japan is really interested about the idea that he postulated in the conference, as a matter of fact, has something to impacts on our military presence, USFK, USFJ into countries, because we are still facing serious threats coming from North Korea, all the missiles and nuclear and whatnot. So as long as this kind of threats persists toward South Korea and Japan, we have a very shared concern and worries about why this kind of make concessions without getting anything in return. So that's why they have to really dissipate the concerns, very legitimate concern, I said, in South Korea and Japan as well. So that's why he has to debrief what is really going on. Maybe it's a little bit different from the media reports. But anyway, he has to really concern and also kind of assure us the regime, our safety, the security in both Japan and Korea. And then also they're going to work on the following the events that might come, whether it be Japan, Pyongyang or the United States. So there's a lot of follow-up meetings that should be discussed very intensely between the allies, two allies, Korea and Japan.
And just going back some of the details that you've pointed out, it looks like many call the military exercise suspension announced by U.S. President Donald Trump as a major concession from the U.S. side. In other words, it looks like the deal is a freeze on freeze for North Korea. They're saying that they're going to freeze its nuclear programs, and from the U.S. side that they're going to freeze their joint military exercises with South Korea. Isn't this formation something that we've seen perhaps from China, something that China has been pushing?
Yeah, you're right. China was so happy with this announcement because they're the number one priority and concerns whenever we have a North Korean crisis. You see U.S. bombers coming close to the Korean Peninsula and doing some massive exercise, as a matter of fact. So this is not just concern for North Korea, but also it has been always criticized by the Chinese leadership. It's going to be endanger our safety. So I think, as I was listening to some of the reports and comments coming from Beijing this morning, they are all happy, and this is exactly what they've been looking for to come out of the U.S. present. So I think this will otherwise. But also we are tremendously concerned. This is making new friends, but you have to concerned about your close allies, how they're going to feel about this kind of statement.
And we saw that video clip together in studio about the one that played before U.S. President made his presser in front of the reporters. And that video clip produced by U.S. government shows what North Korea would be getting if it opens up to the U.S. or perhaps to the world. Is there any concern that the Western influence is going to make any change in North Korean regime? I
think this is something that has been creative enough because National Security Council was involved in making this program. And the governments, particularly the intelligence guys and the military guys, are very good at making this kind of videos. And this is something we quite often do before the start of big international meetings. I think this is good. And Mr. Kim supposed to like this kind of videos. So that was intentionally designed for him. This is the way we are going to bring you if you decide to the denuclearization. So this will be the bright future for you. I think this is, if Mr. Kim takes it really seriously, I think this kind of his regime will be guaranteed, and the well-being of his citizens will be guaranteed. So this is a good start, and this is nothing just new. We quite often start with this kind of videos in every international meetings, as a matter of fact. We are very good at making this kind of video clips.
Just to bring them on your side.
Right.
And last but not least, what we saw in Singapore in terms of the North Korean leader opening up to public in front of the global cameras, him brimming with some smiles on his face, taking selfies with the Prime Minister of Singapore, and having some little small talks with the U.S. President Donald Trump in between the summits. Has the North Korean leader framed these opportunities in his way, so that it reshapes what he's being thought of around the world?
Exactly. He exactly framed each and every talk and each every speech and each every in his footstep. Because we actually, Mr. Trump said a lot, and Mr. Kim relatively remained very silent. It's not just an English problem, but his strategy is to remain relatively silent and let the others speak a lot, because speaking a lot sometimes understands what Mr. Trump, for example, has a lot in his mind, but also it causes another problem, just like the war games or the expensive. So that's why exactly, I think this is typical Kim Jong-un's strategy, to let them speak a lot while he just remains, about him. And the way they took kind of in a straw, those two of them, and he was not accompanying any translator or interpreter. That means, I am capable enough to understand him, and this is a really designed scheme by North Korean leadership that I'm this much capable. I'm very typical leader, as opposed to very unconventional leader like Mr. Trump. So I think it's very contrasting views by the two leaders, and I don't know who's going to get more credits for this. But so far, many American experts believe this time the winner was Kim Jong-un.
Interesting.
I don't like to admit, but
from the first one, it looks like it.
That's right.
Thank you so much, Doctor, for your insight again today.
Okay.
Thank you for being here.
My pleasure.